This war may not erase countries from the map, but it may do something more important. It may leave several states with the same flags, the same capitals, even the same official borders, while hollowing out the political reality that made them function as the countries they used to be. And that is the real story here. The deepest effect of a regional war is often not who wins the next strike. It is which states come out the other side structurally altered. Because wars like this do not only destroy infrastructure, they expose which systems were already brittle, which alliances were only temporary, and at which governments were being held together by outside pressure more than internal cohesion. As of April 2026, the war centered on Iran has already disrupted energy flows, pushed oil above $100 at points, intensified fighting in Lebanon, raised fears across the Gulf, and sharpened pressure on already fragile states. So if you want analysis that goes beyond headlines and gets to the structural meaning underneath them, subscribe now, because this is exactly the kind of shift that looks messy in real time and obvious in hindsight. The first country is Lebanon. And Lebanon is the clearest case of a state that was already living on borrowed time. Its financial collapse never truly ended. Its institutions never truly recovered. And now the war has placed even more strain on a system that was barely functioning before. At the same time, current reporting suggests Hezbollah has been significantly weakened in parts of southern Lebanon, even as it remains politically defiant and hostile to any settlement imposed from outside. That combination matters. A weakened Hezbollah does not automatically mean a stronger Lebanese state. In fact, it may mean the opposite, a vacuum, a more contested sectarian balance, and even greater outside interference. And that is why Lebanon may be permanently reshaped. Not because it disappears, but because the formula that governed it for decades may no longer be sustainable. If Hezbollah can no longer dominate as before, but Beirut still cannot govern as a real sovereign center, then Lebanon stops being a dysfunctional state in a familiar way and becomes something looser, more fragmented, and more externally managed. The country may still be called Lebanon, but the political arrangement underneath that name may be ending. The second is Yemen. Here, the transformation is even easier to see, because Yemen is already less a unified country than a map of armed zones held together by diplomatic fiction. Reuters reporting this year notes that the Houthis still control Sana'a and the populous Northern Highlands, where roughly 60 to 65% of Yemenis live, while the Southern Transitional Council has pushed harder toward effective control and open secessionism in the south. The internationally recognized government, meanwhile, looks increasingly paralyzed. This war hardens that reality. The Houthis gain relevance every time regional escalation makes them more valuable to Iran and more central to the Red Sea pressure campaign. The South, meanwhile, has stronger incentives than ever to stop pretending reunification is realistic. So the question is no longer whether Yemen is divided, it is whether the world eventually admits that the division is permanent. And tell me in the comments which country on this list you think is closest to crossing that line first, because Yemen has one of the strongest cases. The third is Iraq. Iraq has lived for years inside a strategic contradiction. It has had American support, American presence, and formal sovereignty on one side, while also hosting deeply entrenched Iran-backed militias and political forces on the other. That balance was unstable even before this war. Now it looks less like a balance and more like a countdown. Iran-backed factions in Iraq briefly suspended operations during the ceasefire window, but the wider picture remains one of a state under pressure from forces stronger than its own institutions. Iraq has also been hit economically by the wider energy and export disruption around the conflict. If the American role contracts further, or if Iraqi politics moves more decisively under militia-aligned pressure, Iraq will not vanish. But it may stop being the ambiguous middle ground it has been for years. It may settle into something more openly shaped by Tehran's network, with less room for balancing, less real autonomy, and less pretense that the state monopolizes force. That would be a permanent reshaping, not of borders, but of the country's actual center of gravity. The fourth is Pakistan, and this one carries consequences far beyond the Middle East itself. Pakistan was already a high-stress state before this war, politically polarized, financially constrained, and dependent on external support to keep its macroeconomic position stable. Now add a regional energy shock on top of that. Reuters reported today that Islamabad is scrambling to protect foreign reserves, replace a $3.5 billion UAE loan facility, and even consider a strategic petroleum reserve because of the pressure created by the conflict. That does not mean Pakistan collapses, but it does mean this war could change the internal balance of the Pakistani state. Economic stress strengthens the hand of the military establishment, weakens civilian governments, and raises the political premium on crisis management over reform. And in a nuclear-armed country, that is not just a domestic issue. It is a structural one. If you're getting value from this breakdown, hit like, because these are exactly the kinds of second-order effects most coverage misses until they become impossible to ignore. And the fifth is Saudi Arabia. Not because the kingdom is fragile in the same way as Lebanon or Yemen, but because it may be forced to redefine its entire strategic model. Saudi Arabia spent years trying to move toward a future built on diversification, controlled de-escalation, and the image of a stable investment hub. This war cuts directly against that project. Reuters reported that Gulf states fear paying the price for a war they did not choose, while Saudi Arabia has also pressed Washington to step back from steps that could deepen maritime escalation, especially around Hormuz and the risk of spillover into the Red Sea. So Saudi Arabia may emerge from this war more militarized, more strategically independent, and more skeptical of the old assumption that the American security umbrella can protect Gulf order at an acceptable cost. That is a profound shift, because if Riyadh concludes that external guarantees are no longer sufficient, then it will hedge harder, bargain differently, and build a very different regional posture from the one that defined the last generation. And that is the deeper pattern connecting all five. Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia are obviously not the same kind of country, but each is being pushed by this war toward a more revealing test. What remains when the old stabilizers weaken, when deterrence fails, when money tightens, when outside patrons lose credibility, when armed non-state actors gain leverage, when energy shocks hit governments that were already under strain, the official map starts to matter less than the real distribution of power. That is why this war may permanently reshape these countries, even if no treaty redraws a single border. Lebanon may lose the political formula that defined it. Yemen may formalize its long drift into partition. Iraq may tip into a more explicit sphere of Iranian influence. Pakistan may come out more centralized around security institutions and less around civilian politics. Saudi Arabia may abandon assumptions that shaped Gulf strategy for decades. And notice what all of those outcomes have in common. They are not mainly territorial. They are institutional. They are about who governs, who coerces, who finances, who protects, and who gets to define the national interest when the old order stops working. That is what makes wars like this historically important. The battlefield tells you who can strike. The aftermath tells you which states still know what they are. And if there's someone else who follows this war like a scoreboard but not like a system, share this with them, because the real change is not only in the explosions, it is in the political map taking a new shape underneath the smoke.